You can't win an argument. That's not just a figure of speech. It's a principle of human nature. Even when you win, you lose. Because people don't like being proven wrong. It stings their pride. It pushes them into defense. And more often than not, it deepens their commitment to their original view, no matter how wrong it is. Think about it. If you argue and triumph, what have you achieved? You've made someone feel inferior. You've wounded their ego. And even if they admit you're right, they'll resent you for it. As the old saying goes, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. Take Benjamin Franklin. In his younger days, he loved debate. He would dominate arguments, enjoy proving people wrong, and slowly lost friends. Over time, he realized no one likes to be corrected. So he stopped using words like certainly or undoubtedly. Instead, he'd say, "It appears to me," or, "if I may suggest." This small change made him one of the most respected diplomats of his time. Here's a story. At a dinner party, a guest misquoted a line from the Bible, claiming it was from Shakespeare. One man started to correct him, but the host gently kicked him under the table and redirected the conversation. Later, the man asked why. The host replied, "What good would it have done?" He wasn't ready to be corrected. It would only embarrass him and create tension. The guest left the dinner happy, his pride intact. No conflict, no friction, just tact. This principle isn't about avoiding truth. It's about choosing peace over pride, about knowing that human relationships matter more than temporary victories. So, what should you do instead of arguing? Avoid it altogether. If someone says something wrong or disagreeable, ask yourself, is it really worth confronting? In most cases, it's better to hold your tongue or redirect the energy. If you must disagree, do so indirectly. Use phrases like, "That's an interesting point. Have you considered?" "I might be mistaken, but I thought." "Let's look it up together." You're not giving up your stance. You're giving up the fight. And that makes all the difference. Arguments don't lead to agreement. They lead to resentment. If someone feels cornered or belittled, they'll push back harder, even if they know you're right. It becomes less about the issue and more about their need to defend themselves. There's another example. A garage mechanic was confronted by a customer upset over a bill. The mechanic explained every charge clearly, proved he was right, and the customer stormed out, never to return. A second mechanic, in the same situation, responded differently. He listened calmly, agreed that it was frustrating, and then gently walked the customer through the details. The customer calmed down and stayed loyal for years. Same facts, different approach, and a completely different outcome. Because people don't want to be told they're wrong. They want to feel heard. They want to be respected. Even if you win the logic, you lose the person, and that's a bad trade. So, the next time you feel tempted to correct someone or step into a debate, pause. Ask yourself, is this worth it? What am I really trying to achieve here? If your goal is to connect, persuade, or build trust, arguing won't get you there. There is no victory in making someone else feel small. You can't win an argument, so stop trying. Win people instead. I learned something early in life that changed the way I dealt with people forever. The surest way to make enemies, the fastest route to damaging relationships, is to tell someone they're wrong. Sounds obvious, maybe, but most of us do it without thinking. We correct. We interrupt. We point out flaws in logic or fact. We say things like, "Actually, that's not true," or "You're wrong about that." And we expect the other person to nod and thank us for our wisdom. But it doesn't work like that. When you tell someone they're wrong, no matter how gently, you strike a blow to their pride. You challenge their intelligence, their confidence, their identity. And even if they don't argue back, they tighten up inside. They start defending not just their opinion, but themselves. I've seen it happen again and again. One evening in my course, a young man stood up during a discussion and sharply said to another student, "You're wrong." His tone was cutting, loud enough to make the room go quiet. The other student flushed red, fists clenched. He was embarrassed, angry, humiliated. and nothing productive came of it. After class, I pulled the young man aside and said, "You may have been right in fact, but you were wrong in approach. What you said turned a learning moment into a battle. Since then, I've made it a rule. Never tell anyone they're wrong directly. Not in those words. Not in that tone. Instead, I offer my thoughts with phrases like, 'I may be wrong, but,' or 'here's how it looks to me.' You see, people are more open when they don't feel attacked. They're more willing to reconsider when their dignity stays intact. Let me tell you about a dinner I attended. A guest at the table began quoting historical facts badly. He was confusing dates, misattributing quotes, mixing up names. I knew he was mistaken. So did everyone else. One man at the table leaned forward, ready to correct him, but I gently nudged his leg under the table. He looked at me, confused, and backed off. Later, he asked why I stopped him. "What would you have gained?" I asked. "Would he have thanked you? Or would he have resented being embarrassed in front of others?" He understood. The guest left that dinner feeling confident and respected. And because of that, he remained open to future conversations. No friction. No pride lost. Just goodwill preserved. I've seen the opposite too many times. Years ago, a man in my class told me how he tried to correct his coworkers' political beliefs. He came armed with facts, statistics, even newspaper articles. He thought, if I just show him the truth, he'll change his mind. Instead, the coworker got defensive. The more proof he was given, the more stubborn he became. Eventually, the man changed tactics. He said, "I'd love to understand how you see this. What shaped your thinking?" That single question softened everything. They had a real conversation. And in time, opinions shifted, not through pressure, but through genuine respect. This principle applies everywhere. I remember a student in one of my courses who told me about a fight with his wife over a movie detail. She said one actor played the lead. He insisted it was another. He grabbed his phone, looked it up, and proved her wrong. He won the point and ruined the evening. She went quiet. The connection was lost. Later, he told me, I realized I chose being right over being kind, and I paid for it. And haven't we all done that? But it doesn't have to be that way. There's a better method. When I feel the urge to correct someone, I take a breath. I ask myself, what do I want here? To win the argument or keep the relationship? Most of the time, the answer is clear. So instead of confronting, I lead gently. I might say, "That's an interesting take. Mind if I share what I read recently? I hadn't thought of it that way. Here's another angle I came across." These aren't tricks. They're acts of respect. And here's the thing. When you let someone save face, when you make them feel heard even in disagreement, they're far more likely to consider your perspective. Not in that moment, maybe. But later, when they reflect, when the heat is gone. It's happened to me countless times. I've had people come back days, weeks later and say, "You know, I thought about what you said, and maybe you were right." Not because I told them they were wrong, but because I didn't. So if you really want to influence people, if you want to guide, not push, then stop saying, "You're wrong." Don't make it a personal battle. Make it a shared exploration. Protect their ego, and you'll preserve the path to real connection. Because the surest way to make enemies is to try to prove people wrong. And the surest way to avoid them is to let them be wrong with dignity. There's a strange kind of power in admitting you're wrong. It goes against instinct. Everything in us wants to defend, explain, justify. We don't want to lose face. We want to be seen as competent, right, in control. But I've learned, over and over, that the fastest way to earn someone's respect and to defuse tension is to look them in the eye and say, "You know what? I was wrong." And to mean it. Not weakly, not with excuses, but directly, openly, with full ownership. It stuns people, disarms them, and most of the time, it turns enemies into allies faster than any argument ever could. I remember once being pulled over for speeding. I had no excuse. I'd been careless and was going too fast. As the officer approached, I didn't wait for his lecture. I looked at him and said, "Officer, I was wrong. I was speeding. You have every right to stop me, and I completely understand if you give me a ticket." He paused. His whole posture softened. "Well," he said, "thanks for being honest. I appreciate that." And he let me off with a warning. Now, I wasn't trying to manipulate him. I truly meant what I said. But that moment reminded me how rarely people admit fault, and how powerful it is when they do. Here's the thing. When you argue, when you resist, you trigger the other person's defenses. They dig in. They push back harder. But when you admit fault yourself, they don't need to fight. You've already surrendered the battlefield. And because of that, they often meet you with understanding instead of judgment. I've used this principle in business, in personal life, even in teaching. When I've made mistakes, big ones, I've found that stepping forward quickly and owning them not only repairs trust, but actually increases it. People don't expect perfection, but they respect humility. I once forgot to send important materials to a client before a meeting. I had no excuse. When we sat down, I started by saying this was entirely my fault. I dropped the ball and I take full responsibility. The client nodded, then smiled. "Thanks for saying that. It happens." And we moved on, without tension. Now, imagine if I had blamed someone else, or tried to dodge it. That meeting would have been filled with awkwardness, mistrust, and maybe even lost business. But by admitting I was wrong and doing it quickly, I took the air out of the problem. Let me give you another example. A man in one of my courses told me how he had raised his voice at a colleague during a stressful week. The next day, instead of pretending nothing had happened, he walked into that colleague's office and said, "I owe you an apology. I was completely out of line yesterday. I lost my temper, and I'm sorry." The colleague looked shocked, then said, "I wasn't expecting that. Thank you." That relationship actually improved from that day forward. Why? Because admitting fault takes courage, and people feel that. Now, here's something important. Don't just admit you're wrong when you're cornered. Do it before someone calls you out. That's where the real power lies. When you take initiative, when you own your mistake before it's exposed, it shows integrity. It shows maturity. And it often neutralizes criticism before it even begins. There's a line I love to use when I know I've slipped. Before we go any further, I need to say something. It resets the tone. It opens the door to healing. And it shows the other person that I value honesty more than image. This principle also helps in preventing conflicts from escalating. I recall a neighbor who got angry with me over a misunderstanding about property boundaries. Instead of defending myself, I said, "You're right to be upset. If I were in your shoes, I'd feel the same. I made an assumption without checking in with you. That was wrong." We had a real conversation after that. No yelling. No legal threats. Just two people working something out with mutual respect. So many of the battles we fight in life come not from the problem itself, but from our refusal to say those simple words. "I was wrong." It doesn't make you small. It makes you strong. When you admit your faults quickly and clearly, you take control of the situation. You show confidence. And more often than not, people admire you for it. So don't wait. Don't hide behind pride. If you messed up, say so. And say it like you mean it. There's a mistake I used to make all the time. Someone would say something I disagreed with, something I knew was wrong, and I'd jump right in to correct them. Not out of malice, but out of habit. I thought the fastest way to clarity was through logic, facts, argument. But all I got in return was resistance. I learned, through trial and error, that you can't drive people into agreement. You have to lead them. And the only way to lead someone to reason is by going gently, with respect, and always, always through common ground. When we approach others with a combative tone, they close up. They brace themselves. Their mind doesn't open, it locks. But when we agree with them, even a little, when we affirm what's reasonable in their perspective, we invite them to lower their defenses. And that's where real dialogue begins. I remember once having a disagreement with a colleague about a speaking engagement. He thought one approach would work best. I thought otherwise. My first instinct was to push back, to outline my logic. But I stopped myself. Instead, I said, I can see why that would make sense, especially from your experience. In fact, I thought something similar at first. He relaxed. He nodded. And now that he felt heard, I could add, here's something I noticed that changed my mind. Want to see what you think? Now we were talking. Now it wasn't a contest. It was a conversation. When you begin by acknowledging someone else's point of view, even partially, you build trust. You show that you're not just out to win, you're out to understand. And people respond to that. They soften. They listen. Another time, I spoke with a man who had strong views on a topic we disagreed about. He expected me to argue. He was ready for a fight. But I said, you're right about one thing. This issue is complicated, and people are quick to judge. His posture changed immediately. He said, exactly. That's all I've been trying to say. Then we had a calm, thoughtful exchange. We didn't fully agree, but we respected each other. And that was worth far more than any point scored in a debate. There's something disarming about hearing someone say, I understand what you mean, especially when it's said sincerely. It tells the other person, I see you. I'm not here to attack you. That kind of message opens doors that logic alone never could. A man in one of my classes shared a story about a heated exchange with his teenage son. The boy wanted to drop out of college and pursue music. The father panicked. His instinct was to say, that's irresponsible, or you'll ruin your life. But instead, he paused and said, when I was your age, I had dreams too. I get it. It's hard to follow rules when your heart is pulling you somewhere else. The boy blinked, surprised. They talked for an hour after that. And while the son didn't change his mind immediately, he listened. He heard his father not as an opponent, but as someone who understood him. That's the power of empathy. That's the high road to reason. People are emotional before they are logical. If you don't first touch their heart, you'll never reach their mind. They'll block you out, defend their pride, and walk away more convinced than ever that you just don't get it. But when you lead with understanding, when you begin where they are, not where you want them to be, you give them the freedom to explore other possibilities without shame. And often, they do. That doesn't mean you agree with everything. It means you choose to build a bridge before asking someone to cross it. Even in business, I've seen this principle win the day. A salesman once told me how he handled a difficult client who wanted features the company couldn't provide. Instead of saying, that's not possible, he said, you're absolutely right to expect that. And honestly, I wish we offered it. Some of our competitors do. Here's why we haven't yet, and what we've done instead. The client listened. The deal went through. Not because the salesman changed the facts, but because he respected the concern and built his case from there. We don't lose influence by acknowledging someone else's truth. We gain it. So the next time you find yourself in disagreement, don't lead with your argument. Lead with your agreement. Find the part you can say yes to, however small, and start there. It's not manipulation. It's maturity. Because truth without compassion creates walls. But truth with empathy builds paths. And if you want to guide someone to reason, you take the high road first. There's a secret I picked up from one of the greatest minds in history, Socrates. And no, it wasn't philosophy or logic, at least not in the way you'd expect. It was something far simpler and far more powerful. It was the method he used to guide people, not by telling them what to think, but by asking questions they would naturally answer yes to, one after another. Small, agreeable steps. And before they knew it, they'd arrived at the very conclusion Socrates intended, without ever feeling pushed. That technique became one of the most effective tools I've ever used in persuasion. See, most of us approach disagreement like a courtroom. We make our case. We present our facts. We hammer in the logic and hope it sticks. But people don't respond well to pressure. The moment they feel cornered, they resist, even if we're right. But get them saying yes, and everything changes. Yes is the word of agreement, of momentum. When someone says yes, they're psychologically moving toward you. They're open, receptive, collaborative. And the more times they say it, even to small things, the more likely they are to say it again when it matters. I remember talking to a businessman who was frustrated with his employees. He complained that no one followed procedures. They didn't respect deadlines. They just don't care, he said. I could have pushed back. But instead, I asked, would you agree that most people want to do a good job when they feel appreciated? He paused, then nodded. Yes. And do you think it's harder to get great work from someone who feels ignored? Yes, definitely. So maybe part of the problem isn't just their attitude, but how they're being managed. Could that be possible? Another yes. Now we were working together, not arguing. I wasn't lecturing. I was leading. Another time, I spoke with a woman who was resistant to a training program her company offered. She said it was a waste of time. Instead of arguing, I asked, would it be fair to say that staying competitive in today's market means constantly upgrading our skills? She nodded. And do you agree that sometimes we don't realize how much we're missing until we're exposed to something new? Yes. So maybe this training could offer at least one useful idea, even if the rest doesn't apply. Would that be worth an hour? She smiled. All right, I'll give it a try. She said yes, not because I convinced her, but because she convinced herself. That's the genius of Socrates. He didn't fight people's resistance. He bypassed it entirely. People like to be consistent. When they say yes once, they're more likely to say it again. And when those yes build, you gain influence without ever having to push. Now, this isn't about manipulation. It's about respect. You're not tricking someone, you're guiding them. You're aligning with their values, their logic, their instincts. And by starting where they already agree, you make it easier for them to keep walking with you. I once worked with a manager who was struggling to get his team to adopt a new system. He was getting pushback at every turn. I asked him, before you present the change, do you remind them why they joined the company in the first place? The values they believe in. He hadn't. So he tried something new. At the next meeting, he began by asking, would you all agree that our mission is to serve our clients as effectively as possible? Heads nodded. And can we agree that when we waste time on outdated systems, it hurts that mission? More nods. Then wouldn't it make sense to try something that could help us serve better? By the time he introduced the change, the team was already leaning in. Not because he had changed the facts, but because he had changed the frame. Yes builds bridges. And when someone starts saying yes, they stop seeing you as a threat and start seeing you as an ally. So, the next time you want someone to consider your idea, don't begin with why they're wrong. Don't start with what needs to change. Start with agreement. Find the truths you both believe in. Ask questions that lead to a natural yes. Let them walk with you instead of pulling them forward. And by the time you arrive at your destination, they'll feel like they got there on their own. Because that's how real persuasion works. You don't win people by force. You win them with yes. One of the most powerful lessons I've ever learned about human nature is this. When someone is upset, angry, or frustrated, let them talk. Don't interrupt. Don't correct. Don't try to explain your side. Just listen. It's not always easy. Our instinct is to defend ourselves, to jump in and fix the misunderstanding. But when emotions are high, logic doesn't land. What people want, what they need, is to feel heard. That's the safety valve. That's the release. And if you give it to them, everything else becomes easier. I've used this principle in countless situations, especially when dealing with complaints. There was a time I received a furious letter from a client. He was unhappy about something one of my team members had said. The letter was long, accusatory, and emotionally charged. I could have written back defending us, explaining the context, pointing out that the client had misunderstood, but I didn't. Instead, I called him, and for the first 10 minutes, I said nothing. He vented. He raised his voice. He repeated himself. I could hear the tension in every word, and all I did was listen calmly, silently, without interruption. Finally, his tone softened, and he said, Thanks for hearing me out. I needed to get that off my chest. That moment changed everything. I then said, I can see why you're upset. If I were in your position, I'd feel exactly the same. And that was it. No argument. No need for defense. He felt understood, and that alone diffused the entire problem. The truth is, most people aren't looking for a fight. They're looking for acknowledgement. They want to know that their feelings matter. When we interrupt, argue, or try to minimize their complaint, we make things worse. We invalidate them. We escalate the emotion instead of releasing it. But when we let them speak, fully, without pressure, they often run out of steam on their own. I've even tested this in personal situations. Once, a friend called me in a fury over a mutual misunderstanding. I started to explain my side, but caught myself. I took a breath and said, "Tell me everything. I'm listening." He did. It took 20 minutes. But by the end, he apologized for getting so worked up. I hadn't said a word in my defense. I had just made space for his frustration. This isn't passivity. It's strategic patience. Because once people feel heard, they can finally hear you. There was another instance where an employee came to me with a long list of grievances. Instead of correcting him point by point, I asked, "Anything else?" Every time he paused. That surprised him. It also encouraged him to keep going, until, eventually, he ran out. And when he did, he said something I didn't expect. "Thank you for letting me get this out." I needed that. He was more receptive after that than he had been in weeks. I didn't agree with everything he said. I didn't have to. I just gave him a place to speak. This approach works in marriage, parenting, business, and even casual conversation. People carry around tension, resentments, fears, disappointments. If you give them a place to let those things out safely, without judgment, they won't forget it. They'll trust you more. They'll respect you more. And they'll be far more willing to hear what you have to say. Because communication isn't just about speaking. It's about allowing others the space to be real. And that's especially true when emotions run high. So the next time someone comes at you with frustration, don't meet it with explanations. Don't rush to fix it. Just stop. Look them in the eye and say, "I'm listening." And mean it. Let them pour it all out. Let them empty the emotional bucket. Only then, once the pressure is gone, can you begin a real conversation. It's not weakness. It's wisdom. Because when someone feels safe to speak, they stop shouting. And when they stop shouting, they start listening. That's the key. Let them talk. There was a time I thought that if I wanted something done, I had to be direct. Give an order. Be clear. Firm. Efficient. But I learned that there's a better way, a way that gets results without creating resistance. A way that builds cooperation instead of resentment. And it's this. Ask instead of telling. Don't say, "Do this." Say, "Could you help me with this?" Don't say, "You need to fix that." Say, "What do you think would improve this?" It's a subtle shift, but it makes a massive difference. People don't like being ordered around. We might follow commands out of duty or fear, but we don't enjoy it. And often, we push back, even if only in spirit. But when we're asked, invited, included, we respond differently. We feel respected, and that makes us more willing to act. I started using this approach with my team. Instead of saying, "You didn't follow instructions," I'd say, "Could we look at this together and see what might be missing?" Instead of demanding, I'd engage. And the results? Better attitudes. More collaboration. Fewer arguments. I once had a student in one of my classes who ran a print shop. He struggled with employee morale. Deadlines were missed. Tension ran high. He used to bark out orders, tighten up, move faster, be accurate. Then one day, he changed his method. Instead of saying, "Fix this mistake," he asked, "How do you think we could avoid this next time?" Instead of, "Get this out by noon," he asked, "What's the fastest way we can turn this around today?" And things changed. Employees leaned in. They took ownership. They suggested solutions. Because now they weren't just being told what to do, they were part of the process. This isn't just about politeness. It's about psychology. When you ask someone to do something, you awaken their autonomy. You let them say yes freely. And a voluntary yes is always more powerful than an obligated one. Even in situations where you technically have the authority to command, it still works better to ask. Take parenting. A father once told me he struggled getting his son to clean his room. The more he ordered, the more the boy resisted. So I suggested he ask instead, "What do you think needs to happen in your room so it's easier to find your stuff?" Or, "Could you help me by tidying up your desk today?" The boy didn't roll his eyes. He nodded. And he did it. Because kids, like adults, want to feel they have a say. I've also used this method with clients, especially when asking for decisions. Instead of saying, "Sign here," I ask, "Do you feel this agreement reflects everything we discussed?" That one question opens the door to honest feedback, and more often than not, a signature. People want to feel involved, not manipulated. They want to contribute, not just comply. Another example, a hotel manager once told me how she used to struggle getting her staff to follow new cleanliness protocols. She'd email instructions, post signs, and even hold meetings. But compliance was low. Then she tried something else. She walked up to each team member and asked, "What's one thing we can do to make guests feel more cared for in their rooms?" They had ideas. They gave input. And those ideas included the very steps she'd been trying to implement. Only now, they were their own. When people help create the plan, they don't fight it. They support it. That's the real secret. If you want people on your side, if you want their energy, their creativity, their commitment, then don't push them. Invite them. Ask questions. Involve them in the thinking. Frame problems as puzzles to solve together. Instead of saying, "Here's what I need," ask, "How would you approach this?" Instead of, "Fix this," ask, "Can we make this better together?" Because when you ask instead of order, you turn resistance into cooperation. You make people feel like partners. And partners give more than followers ever will. So ask,